Good evening. My name's Tas Demos. I'm a partner at BDH Leaders, and I'd like to welcome you all tonight to this presentation on how to successfully purchase a pharmacy. We're pretty grateful that Sean Roffey from PBS Pharmacy Brokers is able to join us and present this. Sean, for those of you that may or may not know, is a pretty well known and well regarded stockbroker in the broker in the pharmacy industry, having sold hundreds of pharmacies throughout his career. So what like I said, the agenda of this and what we're going to be doing today is going through who we are as accountants and then handing it over to Sean from PBS Pharmacy Brokers. We'll have a Q&A. At the moment, everyone is muted, and what we will do at the conclusion of this presentation, I'll hand over to one of my partners, Jude Baroni, who will facilitate the questions later on. We'll open it up for people to send it through or to ask their questions directly of Sean. BDH Leaders, we're accountants, financial consultants. We started our business, 25, 26 years ago, having been trained with KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, those big four, and we've got experience in all sorts of clients, all sorts of sizes, and our main focus, and I suppose the reason why we started our practice was because we actually wanted to provide that level of service to clients of all sizes and take into account the holistic view of the clients, not just focusing on their accounting and tax affairs. We specialise in the pharmacy sector, and Jude Baroni's basically been born and bred in the pharmacy space since a little kid. And we're just based in Sydney, contactable. You can talk to any one of us in the same way that you can talk to Sean freely. I'm going to throw it over to Sean, who will start the presentation on what it takes to buy a pharmacy and what makes a successful transaction. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Tas. And I must say, really nice words to start. So just for people who don't know who I am, obviously Tas has given a good insight on who I am. I've been buying and selling pharmacies on behalf of pharmacists for 20 years, actually 21 years. I don't want to sell myself short. One thing I really enjoy is the success of mum and dad pharmacists getting into ownership. The sad part of that is I see so many people fail at that. Okay, they don't succeed in the purchase plan, so they haven't got a plan in place on what do I do or how do I successfully purchase a pharmacy. It's not easy. There's a lot to it. And look, what I want to do tonight is just hopefully you can take something away from my presentation tonight that is a little trigger, or you run into, you're out offering on businesses and something, little light bulb moment goes off. Sean said, and I'm hoping you can all take something away. So what I tried to do is break it down into 5 points tonight. The list is endless. It's not an easy process. It can be, you can make it harder than it should be. So the 5 points we're going to cover tonight, which are up in front of you. Well, actually, we've got 6. There we go. Understanding your purchasing capacity, what location and style best suits your search criteria. Importance of your team. Now, I can't emphasize that enough. Importance of your team is massive. You need the right people behind you. So we'll talk about that. Understanding the current market, which is evolving because of COVID. Entering the market and you're putting your foot in the water and moving forward after acceptance of the offer. So that's what I'm going to cover tonight. So if we tick over a slide, Tas, and we'll just get straight into it. So if we want to talk about understanding your capacity, when you go to look at a pharmacy, you need to understand what you can afford. There's not much point looking at 100 pharmacies with a value of $2.5 million plus if you haven't got the capacity to purchase it. Number one, not speaking for myself, but probably speaking for the other brokers, we don't really want to be giving out our files to people that can't afford to buy a pharmacy. Now, selfish on our behalf, but we're protecting clients' information. So you need to know, if I look at a pharmacy at $1 million, can I afford that? Right now, $1 million, you're going to need about $350,000 because prices are probably at their peak at the moment. Again, due to COVID, we'll talk about that later on. So you need to understand that capacity. Where's your money coming from? Are you pulling in funds from a family member? Is it a gift from your mum and dad? Is your mum and dad willing to mortgage their house for you? Which not sure how what the bank's opinion is on that at the moment. So it's really, you need to have all this background information prepared, and you also need to know who's going to assist you with that process. So let's talk about how much personal funds you'll need. So I briefly mentioned, okay, a city business, you're going to need about 30 to 35% of the purchase price, either cash or equity in your pocket. Ultimately, you're going to need to go to a bank, get pre-approval. We'll talk about that later on. You're also going to need to have someone in your corner. So the big question is, who can assist you? You can go to a bank. And I know there is someone listening tonight who I had a discussion with today, and I'm not going to say names. They went to a bank looking at a lovely pharmacy. So just thought I'd share an example. Looking at a really nice pharmacy, and the bank said, we need to do a full valuation. That's going to cost $5,000 to $10,000, and it's going to take a couple of weeks. Well, unfortunately, if this pharmacist followed the bank's rules, they will never buy a pharmacy, because each time they look at one, the bank's going to want to get a bank valuer to do a valuation on this business. What you need to do, and why you need to talk to, and why you need to understand your purchasing capacities, I think you should talk to a finance broker with pharmacy-specific experience. A finance broker will be able to run through your financials, and I will say, Tass, also your accountant, but a finance broker will be able to run through, give you a quick, 1 hour rundown of your financials and understand your position and give you an indication on what you can afford. Okay, so it's really important that you have the right team. And I think we talk about the team in a couple of points, but I think your finance broker can assist you. Your accountant, if you already own a pharmacy, you might be listening in tonight. This is not your first purchase. This might be a second, third, or fourth purchase. So you just want to pick up 1 or 2 points. You will obviously need a lot of input from your accountant if that is the case.
Sean, before we go on to the next slide,
go for it.
Can I just talk about the banks? Can I ask you, in terms of bank funding and in terms of the parameters that banks sort of lend on, can you give us a bit of an idea? Because obviously different pharmacies have got different mix in terms of the revenues, and some banks, they sort of turn their nose up when there's too much on the retail side happening in a pharmacy and they don't lend as much. What's your experience been in relation to banks providing funding to pharmacies generally, and the sort of LVRs you were talking about? Basically with your examples, a 30% LVR is what you're going to have to sort of tip in, which means the bank will lend you 70% of the required purchase amount.
Yeah,
I suppose there are obviously twists and turns in terms of the amount that they will sort of lend. Can you sort of flag in terms of what you've seen?
Okay, so what I'm seeing is that right now, because of COVID, prices are high, and there's a real differentiation between market value and bank value. Now, there's two valuations for each pharmacy. There's the bank, which is the lowest, which is the conservative approach. So LVRs are probably around 75, 80%, depends who you go with. But because of that differentiation between bank value and market being the higher of the two, that's why you're needing that 30, 35% in your pocket. And it's fairly great at the moment, and that differentiation is large. Crystal ball into the future, don't know. Post-COVID, who knows? You know, will there be a flood to the market of pharmacies like we're expecting with houses to cool it off? We've all waited for that. We've all hoped for that. I know as buyers you've hoped for that, but it continues to grow.
Yeah. The other point that I will make in relation to your purchasing capacity and the funding that you require, let's not also forget that, you know, it's also good to have some working capital behind you, so that, you know, you can pay the wages after the first week and the rent after the first month, etc., etc. I think that's an important point that's sometimes overlooked.
Very, and spoken by a good accountant, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. One thing I did mention just on that last slide, just quickly, if you're a first-time buyer as well, you're going to need a resume and you're going to need a business plan. The banks are all going to want to see those. So whether or not, and you don't want to leave that to the last minute. So it's something to work on now. Get cracking on that. Have it aside. Have it ready to go. So when your finance broker or your bank who's doing an application for you ask, you're not a week behind. You're ready to run. Again, it's all about preparation. Be prepared. Have the plans ready to go. So we just go to the next slide, Tass. That'd be good. Location and best style. Now we're talking styles. We're talking, you know, medical centre, you know, shopping centre, marketplace, strip. So there's so many different types of pharmacies. Let's talk about location. Where do you want to own a pharmacy? Do you want to own a pharmacy close to home? Do you want to own a pharmacy rural New South Wales? If we break New South Wales market down into segments, obviously there's Sydney, Central Coast, Newcastle, Wollongong, rural north, rural south, rural west, and then obviously there's larger rural centres. What I find is most buyers, if they've lived in the country, they're happy to own the country. I want to start a discussion later on, and I've highlighted it here because it's a good time to point it out. I want to start a discussion based on city versus country. And what I want you to just, in the back of your minds now, just think about pockets full of money. And that's all I'm going to say. We'll talk more about that later. But for me, if I had my time over, I was a pharmacist, I'd be going west of the mountains and filling my pockets up full of money. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So you got to think, where do you want to look? There's not much use looking at every pharmacy that enters the market if you're not going to buy in that area. So do your research. Again, speaking on behalf of all of the brokers, we really protect our clients' information. If you're not looking for a pharmacy in the country, don't look at the country pharmacies, because sadly, you'll be wasting your time putting the effort into that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just sorry, I'll try not to make a point on each slide. In terms of location, what about the value of the community and all that sort of stuff that a community pharmacist would have, and the value that would sort of place on the pharmacy itself?
Oh, look, it all comes down to what pharmacists want to get out of their pharmacy. Some pharmacists would rather be in a medical centre where they're just churning out scripts. Community strip is that really community type business where, you know, they're held in high regard, they're the pharmacies which have done really well over COVID. You know, people have flocked back into the community type business.
Yeah.
Have moved away from the big box discounters and seeking a bit of mum and dad service. And I think, you know, that's where pharmacy's future belongs. It's not, I don't think pharmacy's future belongs in the large shopping centres. I think it belongs back with mum and dad in community, whether that be high street community, just community strip, or even a marketplace shopping centre. That's where people are flocking back to.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still on this slide though.
Still on this slide?
Yeah,
okay.
No. So actually, let's talk a bit about the country versus city. Why I like country businesses. Typically, a country business has a higher net profit, okay? And you would be able to purchase that pharmacy at a higher return being lower value, Okay, I don't want to get into a return on investment discussion tonight because there's too many numbers. Maybe Tass might want to jump in with something on that, but let's just talk about why country pharmacies are more profitable. They have low hours. They have a higher GP because of less competition. They do have downsides, distance from family, probably higher wage because country pharmacies expect a higher, country residents, sorry, expect a higher level of service. Also need to talk about what style of pharmacy best suits you, banner groups. What experience you have in pharmacy? Have you worked in a price line? Have you worked in the chemist warehouse? Or let's call it generic discounters or big box banner? You know, or are you that pharmacist that's worked in hospital pharmacy and thinks a medical centre pharmacy is going to be better? You need to think what best suits your search requirement, because when you go and do your plan for the bank on who you are, what you're going to do with the business, that is all really important. If you pick up that experience on where you've been, what you want to do, and where you're going in your future in pharmacy ownership, that's a good story, and that's going to work in your favour. Taz, we can tick over if you like, unless you've got another question.
No, I don't have another question. I'll remain silent for a little bit.
Okay, that's good. I think the most important part in a pharmacy search to be successful is your team, okay? And I put accountant first because your accountant is someone that has a wealth of knowledge, someone that you'll pick up the phone, you go, Tass, I'm looking at this pharmacy, I don't know what I should be paying. Your accountant can run over the numbers quickly. If you're just after a 5-minute quick, you know, it's all happening quickly, what's it worth? Your accountant's the place to go, okay? Whether or not Tass agrees with a 5-minute, you know, quick valuation, but, you know, pharmacies come and go within 2-3 days, particularly in the capital cities, so you really need to be quick.
Just on that point, Sean, I think it's important to, look, your accountant should know off the back, if they're specialists in pharmacies, they should know what the return on investment and all that sort of stuff, and how to value these things quite quickly, so you don't miss an opportunity. So I do take that point, and I think the importance is critical in terms of talking to your accountant, because you don't want to set this up incorrectly either, because once you do a deal, it's very hard to unwind. Yeah,
I got into talking about structure. You know, accountants talk about your ownership structure. Lucky enough, pharmacy, you can now own in a company name. It's been many years when that rule changed. So structure is really important. Your accountant will do your due diligence. Just briefly, due diligence is the process of reviewing financials in a deeper format, which is something which is done after offer and acceptance, in between offer and acceptance and exchange. I'll talk about that later. So the accountant really is really important, and it's one of those members of your team that I think you need to have cemented in before you go looking at businesses. When that right business comes up, you just want to be able to pick up the phone or send an email and they grab it and run with it, because the quicker they do that, the quicker you're offering and the best chance you have at succeeding into pharmacy ownership. Lawyer. Now, you need a solicitor. And I think, I can't tell you how many times have buyers come to me and go, have you got a lawyer? Yes, I have. Who have you got? Oh, you know, the average Joe down the road who's done a property purchase and they've got no idea about pharmacy. Pharmacy or business sales are very specific. They are not a purchase of property contract. It is a revolving contract. What you would find, a lawyer is going to charge, a solicitor is going to charge you anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000 to $15,000 for the purchase of a pharmacy. It's not cheap, but you get what you pay for. If you want a backyard job, you can pay $2,000, but you're potentially leaving yourself open to issues later on, contractual issues. A lawyer reviews contract. Lawyers communicate with each other in their own, let's call it language. They understand each other, okay? Your lawyer will handle your regulatory bodies, so your pharmacy council application, your Medicare application. They understand that process. They have the contacts, and I do recommend a lawyer that is pharmacy, not specific, but that has done pharmacy before. Because if they get a contract in front of them, you don't want to have a lawyer rewrite a whole contract. That's going to be very costly. You want a lawyer that understands pharmacy, that knows what they're looking for, knows how to protect you as their client, knows how to advise you accordingly. Just another thing, a lawyer also does due diligence. That contract negotiation, contract discussion is due diligence. And they also do lease reviews. So they'll review the lease, looking for that ugly stuff, demolition clauses. They may even give you some advice on, your yearly reviews. If your yearly reviews are 5% plus CPI or something crazy like that, they may even make commentary around that. The term of the lease, they handle the assignment of the lease, and they actually go all the way through with you holding your hand all the way through to settlement. So as you can see, a lawyer or a solicitor is really important to the process and will work hand in hand with your accountant. And it's always good if they've actually got a relationship too, because it makes life very easy. The third person you need to know is your finance broker or your bank. You might want to deal directly with the bank. I do ask you not to walk straight into a bank and say, hi, I'm a pharmacist, I want to buy a pharmacy. They don't know what they're doing at branch level. Not that there's many branches around now. I think, again, you need a pharmacy-specific finance broker. One, they'll give you a pre-approval. Okay, they'll understand, if we talked about that before, they understand how it all works. They've got relationships with many doctors. Doctors, where do doctors come from? Anyway, they've got relationships with many banks and can point you in the right direction. Whilst they get paid on a success fee and a trail, their job, and it's really highly scrutinised, is to, one, get you the best deal that suits your requirements for the time. So you can understand the common thread here. Team is really important. If you haven't got a cohesive team ready to jump when you show them a file, you're behind the 8 ball. You need to be prepared. You need to be able to pick up the phone, ring them, bring them all together, and run forward. And that's part of that real preparation. The 5 P's of success: preparation, friends, piss, poor performance. It is really, really important to have those that team there. You got any comments on that, Tass?
All I'll say is, look, the hardest transaction is the first transaction that you do. And it is, you'll have a bit of a stumbling block, but I think the important point in all of this is, look, your accountant and your solicitor are probably the 2 key people, because they will be able to direct you in the line into who it is to speak to get the funding and the finance. And if they're commercial minded, they should be able to iron out the whole process, do a quick due diligence on it at a very high level, do the contract negotiations and steer you in the right direction with the banks, and actually take the bank negotiations to settlement.
And they do. And they keep holding banks to account too. If the banks are slow, they know what buttons to push and how to move them on.
And who to speak to, absolutely.
Yeah, and I do recommend a finance broker that's got no links to anyone. That's their job is just finance. Yeah. So they're running their own race.
Absolutely.
We'll tick her over. So understanding the current market. Wow, what a market we're in. You guys are a member of a very unique, fast-paced market, however changing. And we'll start at the bottom, actually, because COVID is on top of mind. We're coming through the other side. However, what it's done, there's been a lack of opportunities put to the market for buyers like yourselves, which has driven prices higher. So for us, when we talk returns, we talk about a lower return, which is a higher price. Currently, Sydney's at about 13% to 14% return on investment. Now, I've been selling pharmacy since the year 2000, and a Sydney pharmacy used to sell at a return on investment or a multiple of 5 times, which is 20% return on investment. So it has changed a lot over the years and continues to change. Areas like The Central Coast, Newcastle are very similar to Sydney, maybe 0.5% in it. Again, Wollongong's very similar to Sydney at the moment. Rural coastal, there's been a few, it's a popular area. Where would you like to live? Everyone says by the beach, on the coast. Housing's a lot cheaper, so prices are high. A few rumours up the north coast of pharmacies going for 15%, which has never been seen before. Rural west, the further west you go from Sydney or the coast, the better the return for the buyer. So 5 times multiple or 20% return investment west of the Great Divide, outside of major rural centre. So we could classify a major rural centre as Orange, Dubbo, Bathurst, Tamworth, Armidale. They're probably sitting around the 17% return on investment at the moment. It's really important, you know, it's really important for you to understand where you want to go, how far your money will stretch. So if we just look at money stretching, we talked about in Sydney, if you buy a $1 million pharmacy, you probably need about $350,000. Okay, so up to $2 million pharmacy, you're going to need about $700,000 in today's market. If you take that out to country, you probably need 200 to 250 maximum per $1 million. So that stretches your funds a lot further, and you can get a different type of, different lifestyle out there, cheaper housing. And that's why I talk about the pockets full of money. You know, if I was to do this over again, be a pharmacist, if I was a pharmacist, I'd buy a country, fill my pockets up, do my time, do my 10 years, sell up, move back to Sydney. I'd own the pharmacy in the country. I'd be wealthy, I'd have property, and I'd move back into the capital city areas. It's not that simple, but it sounds simple, and it should be simple. Buyer activity is extremely high at the moment. As I said, lack of listings, just like the property market. Pharmacies in Sydney are selling in 2 days. Again, the importance of your team, you need your team ready to go, okay? Low interest rates are also causing this phenomenon at the moment. And I don't think it's going to change in the short term. We're going to run into 2022. I think we're going to see a bit of a flood to the market, probably February, June being the next selling cycle, but I don't think it's going to change things. So I just, again, preparation, how to purchase a pharmacy successfully is be prepared. So you need to be prepared for that next sales cycle coming through with all the listings. Just got a couple of notes I want to make sure. Look, return on investment we touched on briefly. So Tass, I don't know if you wanted to put an accountant spin on a return on investment, or you're happy for me to go forward with that one?
No, I think I'm happy with what you said in terms of the return on investment being between 13 and 15% and 18% out in the country. I mean, that's what we're sort of seeing in terms of client valuations for finance and things that are sort of coming through. So it's pretty consistent what we're seeing with what you've just mentioned.
Yep, excellent. Go to the next slide. So moving forward after your offer, straight off due diligence. So you get your offer accepted, you get that wonderful phone call, or you get the email where the vendor's signed off on your offer document. And can I just give you a highlight, please? When you're signing an offer document, make sure it is a non-binding offer. Okay, you do not sign a binding offer on an offer. Okay, it's just an offer. Okay, that offer allows you to do due diligence. That offer allows you to submit your finance application. Okay, that offer does not lock you in. What locks you in is a contract, and we talk about contract next. So due diligence is typically a 2-week period where TAS, and let's use TAS as an example, will send a list to the broker to communicate with his client a whole heap of information. They'll want bank statements, rental statements, BAD statements, monthly dispensary statements, accountant general ledgers to say, and that's a small list, okay? That's just a brief. But what an accountant will do is dig at a deeper level. What I provide you as a buyer in my information memorandum is a valuation, and then I provide follow-up financial documentation. But that's a very precise financial documentation or document for you to review. TAS and accountants will review deeper. They want to know how it's brought together. They actually want to know, is it factual? And that's their job. It might sound bad that, you know, I've given you a pharmacy or a broker's given you a pharmacy and your accountant says, well, hey, these are, I want to make sure this is right. Well, that's their job. That's why you pay your accountant. You need to know what you're buying. You need to make sure what you're buying is true. Part of that due diligence will also form your bank valuation, okay? Your accountant will probably work with your finance broker on the due diligence and provide information to a bank valuer. Now, bank valuers kind of do a mini due diligence, but don't rely on that, okay? Rely on your accountant, and your accountant's going to dig deep and have a look at that. So your solicitor then will also do their DD on the lease, but your solicitor gets the contract. Now, we touched on the contract. So your solicitor will review what is provided to him by the vendor's solicitor. Now, that could be seen as a very one-way document. So the document prepared by the vendor's solicitor, what rights do you have or your solicitor have to make changes? Well, they've got lots of rights to make changes because your solicitor wants to make sure that that contract is in place and protects you as a buyer. You can end up in Supreme Court. There is cases of pharmacy sales where people have ended up in court. So that contract needs to be in the grain, or actually needs to be a two-way document. It's got to be good for you and it's got to be good for the vendor. So that's what your solicitor's there to do. Your solicitor will also offer you advice. Your solicitor will arrange the exchange of the contract, and your solicitor will work all the way through to settlement. But getting to settlement, there's lots of other things you need to do. Bank valuation we talked about, which is about $3,000 to $4,000. A little shocked when I got told today it was $5,000 to $10,000, but I know it's not. It's $3,000 to $4,000. You know, you need to handle your finance application with your finance broker. You know, once we get through all that, you get it offer accepted. You've got to exchange your contract. Now, what does exchange? So the process is offer accepted, due diligence, finance application, exchange of contract, which locks it in. That's the point that locks it in, where you've got to pay a deposit. From there, you need to do all your applications with Pharmacy Council and Medicare. Again, as I said earlier, your solicitor will assist you with that. A good accountant will also assist you with that as well, or a good broker. But unfortunately, I must say, the pharmacy councils would rather talk to a solicitor, a lawyer. And then you have settlement. Now, settlement's an unusual process because it's a meeting of two solicitors where money hands over and it settles. It's not monumental. It's just, next thing you know, you own a pharmacy. But the evening, typically the evening before settlement, you have a stock take as well. So again, there's some costs there. You got a lawyer cost, you got a bank valuation cost, you got accountancy costs, and you got a stock take costs. So on top of your, if you're $1 million pharmacy in Sydney, you need $350,000 to fund the gap. You probably need another $20,000 to $30,000 in costs. Okay, so it's not a cheap exercise. You want to do it, if you're going to do it once, you want to do it right. So again, harping back to the team's going to help you move forward after the acceptance of your offer. I'm sure you've got some questions, Taz.
Not on this one, mate. It's quite a simple process, although it's quite a daunting process, especially for the first timers. Making sure that everything's done properly and nothing's been missed. I suppose the importance is, obviously, if your accountant's doing a due diligence, it's important for them to actually test the numbers that's going to be on the IM, and your solicitor needs to be quite commercial in terms of how he's dealing with the contracts, because you know, I have come across a number of solicitors who are very risk averse and will almost frighten a potential purchaser away from transacting on a business.
Yeah, seen that too many times, unfortunately. And that's why I harp on, I think you need a pharmacy specialist, someone that understands business and someone that will sit down and talk out any issues with you rather than, having a dogged approach that just walk away. That doesn't benefit anyone. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insight. I'm going to throw it over to Jeed Baroni, my partner, who is going to facilitate any questions that anyone may or may not have in relation to your presentation. Jeed?
Thanks, Tass. Look, thanks, Sean. It was a fantastic presentation, and there's plenty of things that I think that people need to be aware of, and particularly around planning, getting the right team, can help in your structure, getting the finance, the solicitors, getting all that done up front, so you know what you're in for, and you can actually make the process a much smoother process. Because it doesn't have to be hard. But it can be made hard if you don't have the right team and the right, the right people. So in saying that, I'll open that up to any questions. If anyone wants to use the chat box, if we can't get through all the questions tonight, please feel free to send them through to us, and we'll, envisage to get back to you. I'm sure Sean can answer those. So if anybody's got any specific questions, we might open that up. You can either send them through in the chat box, or if you want to, if anyone can open up to speak through their chats.
And if people aren't comfortable tonight doing that, I'm always available on my email or phone. People know they can ring me. I always pick up.
It's on screen at the moment there, so if anyone's feeling a bit embarrassed or shy, Sean's details are on screen. They should be.
Yeah,
they are.
Yeah. So look, one question I've got, Sean, is around the structure too, because one area that I think, as accountants and particularly lawyers, we getting the structure right at the beginning is very important. And have you seen many times where people haven't been prepared or ready with their structures?
We've got some questions coming in, Tass.
Okay.
They're flicking.
Yeah. So there's one about PBS approvals. Just wanting to know a bit more about PBS approvals. Did you want to answer that, Sean? Or
I'll briefly touch on it. It'd be nice to maybe it's a discussion with that person directly. But PBS approval numbers, if you're looking just to open one up, it's you've got to have a location. There's rules and regulations. So it's not as simple. When you buy a pharmacy, yes, you're buying a pharmacy that's got an NHS approval number, which you need to apply for a transfer of that. As long as Pharmacy Council approves it, there's a contract in place and there's a lease in place and there's a sales document in place, you can transfer the NHS approval number. I'm not sure if they're talking about a new approval number, like trying to open one in a shopping centre or in a rural town. But the approval number, if there's one in the business, it goes with the business. It will be a new number, but that's part of the goodwill of the sale.
Yep. So there's another comment about just comments on partnerships with more financially mature support partners, because that can be a way. We see that a lot where there could be an existing pharmacy and they might want to sell down a partnership. They might want to buy into one, or you might want to buy another partnership with someone else who already, is experienced in pharmacy.
I did see that question come in, and I'll say good day to the person. I saw his name. Look, yes, succession planning is not something that really gets done a lot in pharmacy. I think maybe with prices going up, we probably will see more of that. So I think for some groups there is success. I guess partnership does work. Partnership is like a marriage. Okay, you've got to know who you're getting, pardon the pun, into bed with, and understand who you're going to be a partner to. So, it's not a matter of just becoming a partner. I think it's something where you got to know and learn and work with someone first to see that you get on and that partnership could work. It could also be a partnership to a brand, but a wise old pharmacist, teaching a young gun pharmacist, it really does work, and I've seen it succeed, and it's something that everyone should also think about is partnerships.
Can I just make a point there, Sean, on partnerships? And I think a lot of people just do it on a handshake, but I think we're in the current times, I think we're beyond that, where shareholders or partnership agreements need to be put in place, and in particular, there needs to be a focus on exiting. How you get out of that partnership, what happens in the event that we fall out of love, so to speak, or there is a life event that happens with someone crossing the street and they get hit by the bus. What happens in those instances? So when dealing with partnerships, I think you really need to sort of, before committing to them, sit down and work through some of these issues that you may have.
Absolutely.
So there's another question on cost involved in the process. I know you did touch on that, Sean, about the team and the cost and I suppose the equity you require. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on that?
Well, there's a couple of. Tass also made a good point too, that a bit of capital is going to be required too for working capital. But costs. If the question was on costs, if bank valuations are heading towards $5,000, we can simply add it up. Bank values $5,000. A lawyer is going to be anywhere to 15, depending on the review of the lease and what is there a negotiation to do with the lease. It also depends on how prolonged the contract negotiations are. You could have a very dogged vendor or solicitor on one side and your solicitor digging their heels in. The only people that pay is the vendor and the buyer. They're the one that pay the legal costs. Then you may have some other financing costs. Pharmacy counsel is not cheap these days. Your application for pharmacy counsel is depending on your structure, albeit a pharmacy or a trust entity. You could be heading towards $5,000 there. So the costs start to add up. But Tass's point as well about working capital is a very good point. You don't want to push it too far where you've got nothing. You really should have at least a month's worth of purchases that you're going to be able to pay that first wholesaler bill out of cash flow.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the minimum that you need to do.
Yeah.
1 to 3 months is probably what you need to see, because it's not only that, you've got wages. Yes, okay, your API, your Sigma bills, you might be able to put forward charges, but you've still got to pay the rent, you've got to pay the wages. Those things are going to be paid. So before money starts to trickle in. Yeah,
absolutely.
So that sort of answers, I suppose, the next question as well. There's another question regarding when it comes to the equity, cash, property, and shares. Have you seen the lenders treating these all the same?
Well, cash is cash. You've either got it or you don't. So cash is king, I guess. Equity throws up another twist because serviceability comes in. So if you've got a $2 million mortgage in Kellyville, or a $2 million house in Kellyville, you owe $1 million on it. Okay, you've probably only got 700 grand equity or 600 grand equity in it because the bank's going to take a lower value. So I don't know if that's going to answer the question. Cash is better. Shares, I haven't seen a bank take shares into consideration because it moves up and down. They don't get taken into consideration at all. So it's either cash or equity or gift from family members.
Look, and I think that the point needs to be made too. If we're putting the home on the line as well, you're effectively financing 100% of the acquisition price. So when you're looking at that too, you've got to look at the bank will probably want some sort of principal repayment being made over a period of time. What impact is that going to have on your cash flow? And so whilst you might want to do the transaction and settle this thing, I suppose there's got to be a bit of forward planning too, and a forward projecting too, in terms of the impact that your financing costs are going to have on your cash flow, and also there's obviously going to be tax, and that's going to have an impact on your cash flow too. So whilst the business might be profitable, that's one thing. Cash flow is another thing. And your accountant needs, before you sort of commit to something like this, you sort of need to project out what your financing costs and what your tax costs are going to be as well, because they are true cash costs.
Yeah. So what we're typically finding too is that you will be required to prepare a cash flow for the bank anyway. So I mean, although it may not be 100% accurate at the start, but it's something that you should not just do at the beginning. You should be keeping it and updating it on a regular basis as well. With help from your team.
I think part of your pre-approval process that you talk to both your accountant and your bank or finance broker about, how far you can go with what you got, and they'll talk about cash flow, and they'll talk about whether or not borrowing in all of your house is going to work on repayments. And chances are it won't, but you'll need to talk to them about that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So has anybody else got any more questions? Anything else they'd like to ask Sean? Well, it looks like that's I think that looks like it's all the questions. So as Tass was saying, anyone's you got Sean's details. I think that one's come up. Got time for another one, Sean? Yep. So question here is if 35% is needed as a deposit, it would be expected that 25 to 30% would be cash as a preferred amount. So who has that sort of money? It's a very good question, particularly in today's days where a lot of people are actually, saving up large monies for the deposits on their homes, and now they're looking for, a cash deposit. So what are you seeing in that space, Sean?
Well, look, the market just generates market ultimately, and Gunnar, I saw the person, haven't spoken to you for a while, saw that question. Look, market generates market. Will it dry up at any stage? I don't know. There's plenty of cash out there, plenty of buyers out there, whether they're first time or second time, the pockets are still deep. So until it dries up, the market's just going to continue. I don't know I don't know if I can answer that in any other way than being fairly blunt, I guess. When the cash dries up, the market dries up. But right now, we're moving ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So last couple of questions are just, how much are pharmacies in Sydney? You sort of gave a few numbers out there, but I suppose, as you said, it depends where they are. And that's obviously a range. And and how long are lenders taking for finance approvals? So you're saying?
Yeah. G'day, Mark. I saw that question. Depends who you're running with. If you're going straight with the bank, they'll play you around. I still highly regard finance brokers. That's their job. Their job is to push the banks and hold your hand, hold their hand, and bring it to a conclusion. But typically, if you have an offer accepted on a pharmacy before your finance is approved, is probably 6 weeks, I would think. Some brokers would expect you to have it done in 3. Come on, let's get real. 6 weeks. It takes time, and you can't be forced to purchase a pharmacy under duress, okay, being stressed like that. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yep. Okay. Another one here is, how would I need cash equity if the owners of the business are willing to let me borrow against the business, say for a third of the ownership? So are you seeing that banks are asking for additional equity, or are they happy to? I suppose it depends on how much equity is currently in the business, but do you want to answer that, Sean? Or?
I leave an accountant one to answer that one, because you probably
see
it does, at accountancy level. So.
Yeah, look, it does depend. So I suppose to answer that, it does depend on how much equity is in the business. And as Tass mentioned earlier, if you are borrowing close to 100% on the value of the business, the bank is going to require principal repayments. So when you're buying these businesses on 13% returns, you obviously, yes, interest rates are low, and obviously it's probably very affordable. But once you're throwing principal repayments, that's actually got to come in after tax. So there's additional cash flow going out the door that you've got you've got to budget for. So that's another reason why the banks are looking for equity outside of the pharmacy, so they're not lending necessarily 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I have time for one last question?
Yep, we've got time.
Okay. There is they're just asking, has this been recorded? So what's the full discussion? Yep. Look, it is going to be recorded. So we can send out the copy of the recording. So any comment on loans or lending from family or the use of them as guarantors? So keeping in mind non-pharmacists having no financial interest in the business.
Yeah, very interesting question. Again, I think whilst I'm not a finance expert, I sell pharmacies. My understanding is that if they can't go guarantor, your mum and dad, if your mum and dad are old, they can't use the house. The banks don't look at that now.
No,
at all. There's been test cases and people have lost everything. So, it might be a rich uncle giving you money. You'd probably have to sign a statutory declaration saying that money doesn't need to be paid back. Yeah, if it needs to be paid back, the bank will take that into consideration with your capacity and cash flow.
Banks are very loath to take security from parents or a family that's not associated with the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very similar to buying a house. You find it's been even more stringent. Okay, we've got a comment there. I don't think not another question.
I saw that comment.
Yeah, big money, big risk. Yeah, look, it is, and I think that's why a seminar like this is very important for anyone who's interested in buying a business, because as we know, there are some people out there, listening in who are experienced and have been in business and done it before, but there's plenty others who've never done it before, and this may be the only purchase you do. It may be just the first one, and you want to just get it right. You want to make sure that you know what the process is. You leave yourself enough time. You have enough equity, and you have the right team, and you're dealing with the right people, because that's all those things are very important to make the process much smoother and and successful. Because that's really what you're doing. Once you've found a pharmacy, you've made an offer, it's been accepted. Then obviously the next step is to get the approvals, get the finance, and run the business and make it a very successful business.
Yeah, indeed.
I think we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you all for attending tonight. I know it's been a long night for some, and for all. Sean, I'd like to thank you for putting this, for speaking, and for accepting the invitation to join us on this seminar.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll probably do some more next year with you, Sean. And if there's any topics that anyone would like us to sort of bring forward and do presentations on, please drop us an email. Our details are just on this final screen. Again, thank you very much for taking the time out. Sean, thank you again. And we wish you all a good night.